Hi, all. This is my research presentation over the additional research book that we were supposed to do this semester. So, I looked at the complexities of interracial relationships during the antebellum period. What really got me here was my research book, obviously, and that was Remember Me to Miss Louisa. And it just walks through a lot of different relationships that were either secretive or hidden or sent off during the antebellum period in the South. And after reading it, I was really um, drawn to certain questions about the period. So, primarily, I looked at how interracial relationships were viewed by others, perceived by different people in the family and others involved, and how it impacted the family unit, the children of these black and white couples, and so on, and the legal implications from the ban on interracial relationships. So, what legislature led us to be here? So, in terms of the legal research that I did, we looked at the Maryland legislature, which it says to discourage Dives freeborn English women who, forgetful of their free condition and to the disgrace of our nation, married slaves, thus inconveniencing courts and masters with the legal debates over the status of offsprings, and so on and so forth. And this really was a ground piece of evidence for me because I feel like it was very hard to find legislature regarding um, interracial relationships, but this one made it very clear to everybody who was reading it that they were discouraged from it and it was banned in a sense. Not only was this a legal implication, but it was also a social kind of norm that was instilled in the period. We can also look at Richard and Mildred Loving, who are very important in terms of interracial relationships because they went to court over their relationship. They were married in the state of Virginia, and the state was unsure whether their marriage was actually legal and if they would be allowed to do it. And one of the interesting things that they brought up in the case after listening to the audio from it is that they the counter argument, like the state of Virginia was saying how it would increase the rates of divorce and that they were just too different from one another to be together. So that's some of the mindset that they had behind banning these interracial relationships. But I feel like that piece of evidence can easily be disputed. We also look at how black men perceive their interracial relationships. A great example of this is Frederick Douglass, who his second wife is Helen Pitts, who we have in the image right there. He brought religion into it, and he often spoke about it, saying that if the government gives us the right to be married, then we should be able to do that in the eyes of the law, and it shouldn't be there should be no restrictions around it, and that it's a holy matrimony with God, and it's not something that the state should put a ban on. Also, with this, I found it very interesting to see that as black men got more educated, they also got married women outside of their race more frequently. And I just think that contributes a lot to how we view marriage and how the black man viewed marriage, especially with a white woman. Um, we also know that the white woman's response was very influential in these relationships. So it was the white woman who was often married to the white man who's in a relationship with a slave or somebody along those lines. Our text gives a really good example of Lucy Park Bird, who ruled her house with violence and was very strict with her slaves. I think that we often forget how white Southern women were portrayed during these times because they weren't very hospitable or kind. They were rather ruthless. And not all of them, but this just gave us a good example of some that are. And along with that, there was a lot of jealousy from the white women because obviously they know what's happening, and they understand the relationship that their husbands have with white or with slaves or black women. And I just thought that was a really interesting perspective to take on because we look so closely at the relationship and who's in the relationship, but who's directly outside of it that is affected by it as well. Um, and how these men responded to their wives' jealousy, we often see that they would send away their mistresses. Up to Ohio was a very common place. but it was just showed how they would go around their wives to hide their mistresses, and they would probably it was a good mix of combining the men who really cared for their mistresses and those who didn't care as much and what they would subject them to. Um, Lastly, I looked at how it translated into other parts of America. So we obviously see that this applies to other races as well. So the Cherokee legal documentation is talking about how down the road, past the antebellum period, how it came up in our legislature again, and how Cherokee were not willing to give any non-native people their land. And I understand that, but I just think it was interesting to see how this was a repercussion, a consequence of things that have happened so long ago. um we also see that there was a lot of social repercussions for the mixed children. They were often neglected by outside family members outside of their immediate family, and it was a very big question about whether or not they would be accepted into either their white or black family, and so on and so forth. It started a lot of fear in the community because they weren't sure of where they fit in and they didn't really have a place. We also know that it altered our definition of rape and how white women versus black women are seen in the eyes of the law. So I think this is something that the law still struggles with today, but we can see that from the text and from the book itself that black women were subjected to the worst or to the most neglectful type of court, and they were ignored and their issues were ignored. But white women, their issues are seen and maybe not completely accepted, but they're more recognized by the law. So that was kind of just my breakdown of my research paper. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you very much for listening.